All right, good evening, everyone. Welcome to Chapter 9, Lifespan Development. And we are going to get started here. As soon as I hit the right button, there we go. So this chapter is it really focuses on lifespan development, right? We're going to focus on stages of development. We're going to focus on cognitive development, psychosexual development, psychosocial development, and all of these are different theories that are presented in this chapter. So what is lifespan development? So first of all, developmental psychology studies lifelong development that spans three domains, right? First, there's physical development, right? Which represents things like growth and changes in the body, in the brain, in our motor skills, health and wellness, in our senses, right? So these are the areas of physical development that are covered. And then there is cognitive development. So where we focus research and study on learning, which we just did in Chapter 6, attention, memory, and language, which we did in Chapter 8, thinking and reasoning, and of course, creativity. All of that is part of cognitive development. And then psychosocial development, which involves, right, our emotional well-being, our personality, and social interactions and relationships. Now, something that I kind of want to point out, because this comes up every once in a while, and it's come up in previous chapters, right? When we're talking about, in this case, lifespan development, we're looking at like, what's a normative approach? What is like normal development, right? And so for instance, normative psychologists have studied large numbers of children to determine norms, right? That's what they call them, norms. In this case, average ages of when most children reach specific developmental milestones. In other words, like crawling, right? Learning language, walking, speaking in sentences, starting puberty is another developmental milestone. And then under that, of course, is biological milestones, which are more specific to like puberty. And then social milestones, which like starting school. And these will vary across cultures, right? So depending on where a child is. So before we get, well, we're just going to go deep into this right now, actually. So we're going to talk about some issues in developmental psychology, and we're going to look at things like continuous versus discontinuous, and talk about nature versus nurture, which again, this has popped up again. This is probably like the 4th chapter that we've had some mention of nature versus nurture. And then answering or trying to answer the question of, is there one course of development? Are there many? Like what impacts that, right? So that's what we're going to look at. Now, a caution that I always say when it comes to like exams, make sure you slow down and read your question. For instance, continuous and discontinuous can be easily confused in an exam question, right? Because you might have, the question might ask about one specific thing, continuous, but you'll have the answers for continuous or discontinuous to choose from. So just making sure that you're understanding and slowing down to read the question, because I really do believe a lot of people will learn this stuff, but sometimes we just make mistakes that we get things wrong on the exam. So just encourage people to slow down. All right, so let's talk about continuous versus discontinuous. So figure 9.2, that's from the book. And this is a really, I really like this because this really is a nice pictorial representation of continuous development and discontinuous development. And in continuous development, you can see that development is viewed as a cumulative process, right? So if we look at the picture down here, cumulative, it's gradual, improving on existing skills, and you kind of go up in an upward mobility, right? Whereas discontinuous, you can see here, it has more discrete stages, doesn't it, right? So discontinuous development views things as occurring in these unique stages and at specific times, right? So for instance, here in infancy, you know, maybe this is walking and crawling. I'm just giving this as an example. Maybe this, at this age, we're talking in complete sentences. Maybe now we're at, you know, ages, well, depending on if it's male or female, you know, 10 to 13, this is when puberty is starting. And this is just some examples, right? And so you can see discrete stages, specific time periods, and or ages. Oops, sorry. And then the other question that was on that first slide, right, is there one course of development or are there many, right? Is development universal for all children or is it individual, right? Depending on each child's genetic makeup, right? Their phenotype, or I'm sorry, their genotype or their environment, right? So stage theories believe that the process of development overall is universal, right? So the evidence for one course, studies show that children from all around the world meet language milestones in a similar sequence. So if you recall from the was it chapter 8, Thinking and Intelligence, and when we also talked about linguistics, right? And if you recall the video on the linguistic genius of babies, that's a perfect example of what we're talking about. So the evidence there was kind of showing, regardless of whether the child was being exposed to English or Mandarin or Japanese, that they were reaching those milestones linguistically at about the same time, right? Even though that's, ironically, that's not what that study was about, right? That study was about taking statistics, about the language acquisition device and the you know, how children learn language. But you can see cross-culturally, all those children were about the same age, roughly, and they were achieving those milestones very similarly in a similar sequence. So that's one example. The other side of that, though, is that there's also evidence that there are many many courses, right? That development is also affected by cultural differences in childcare practices. And those practices can accelerate development. They can inhibit achievement of developmental milestones, right? So down here, let's see, we have these two kids. This is also from the book, right? Children all across the world love to play, right? So we have picture A and picture B. Picture A is in Florida and picture B is in South Africa. And they're both roughly the same age. They're both kind of doing the same thing. And then nature versus nurture. So you will see this on the exam. You also see it in the homework, right? For this chapter, when you hear the word nature, what I want you to think about is a person's biology and their genetic, their genotype, right? So nature is all about biology, heritability, genetics. Nurture is the environment in which the person is engaged and their culture. So the nurture versus, I always say this backwards. Well, nurture versus nature, nature versus nurture. Debate considers how our personalities and traits are the results of our genetic and biological factor, but also how they are shaped by our environment. And just to also bring you back to a previous chapter, you'll remember the terms range of reaction that we talked about in chapter 8. We also talked about it in chapter 3, right? How our genes are impacted by and shaped by our environment, that range of reaction. So why are siblings sometimes so different? That would be an example of environment, culture, range of reaction. Are adopted children more like their biological or adopted parents? Is intelligence inherited? Is it shaped by our learning experiences, or is it a combination of both? And some of these questions, if you think back to the previous chapters, some of these we've already talked about, right? So for instance, adopted children more like their biological or adopted parents, right? And when it came to the Minnesota studies on intelligence, if you'll recall the twins studies, even when they were reared apart, they had similar IQs. They were more likely to be similar to each other than even well, Richard is experiencing a tip of the tongue moment. Remember from the memory chapter? Just went out of my head. I can't think of the word. Then siblings who were not identical. Go ahead. Sorry. Go ahead.
When we got it in the top of the tongue, I forgot it too. But yes, it's a term that we just forgot about. We got it. We got your idea.
Yeah. Thank goodness. All right. So sorry about that. All right. So the way we answer these questions is by looking at the interaction of both nature and nurture. And again, usually looking at twins and adoption studies, right? So that's how we kind of study these questions. All right, so this next section we're going to talk about is several different theories of development. First one is psychosexual, and then we're going to talk about psychosocial, cognitive, and then moral development. And when it comes to these, I am going to want you to pay attention to who the theorist is and the main idea of the theories behind these. So psychosexual theory, that was Sigmund Freud. He viewed childhood experiences, right, as shaping our personalities. He really thought that issues that adults were having were based on experiences that happened in childhood, right? And he viewed development as discontinuous. And if you remember discontinuous, that's the one that has certain stages. It's not a smooth uphill, but there's distinct ages and distinct time periods when certain things happened. And he developed the stages of psychosexual development. Now, I am going to want you to know about this and be able to relate it to Freud. We're not going to spend a whole lot of time on this in particular, but it is important for you to know who Sigmund Freud is and what his contribution to developmental psychology was about, because he really was the first theorist that talked about stages of development. And since then, other theorists have kind of taken that information and then they've worked around some others. When it comes to Freud, you know, he called it the psychosexual development. Freud was really hyper focused on sex. He was probably sexist, and I'm being kind of kind, I think. And he also believed that that children's pleasure-seeking urges were focused on different erogenous zones at different times, right? So these were the 5 stages. First, there was the oral stage, right? And this is where kids are putting everything in their mouth. Then there's the anal stage, and this is when they're learning like potty training and things such as that. Then there's the phallic stage, and then the latency stage, and then the genital stage, which is the final stage. And the thing with the genital stage is really his stages do not go into adulthood at all. So they kind of end at childhood, right? So there isn't any further development. I am going to show you this video, but it's probably going to be after our break. So we'll come back and review this, and I will show you this video here. We won't do it at this moment. So we're going to come back to this. Let's see here. The next theorist is Erickson, and this is another video I'm going to show you after the break. Erickson had 8 stages, and his go all the way through late adulthood. And I'll be honest, I kind of like Erickson's stages, and actually kind of use these when I was doing my EMDR training. Erickson's stages of development was kind of referenced throughout my EMDR training. One of the things that I will say when it comes backing up to Freud a little bit, he was one that said that problems that adults have stem from childhood stuff. And I do think that in many cases that is correct, right? And so Erickson also kind of has that same thing. He emphasized the more social nature of development, however, whereas Freud was really stuck on sex. Erickson was like, no, this is a social model, that personality development takes place across the lifespan, not just in childhood. So even as we emerge from, adolescence and into early adulthood, middle adulthood, on through, that we are still in some form of developing. Like we change things. We can change along the way. And in each stage, there is a psychosocial task that we must master in order to feel a sense of competence. Let's see here. And so these are the stages. And so let me back up 1 second, because I do just kind of want to point this out. So what we're going to focus on right now is the psychosocial task that must be mastered. And this was how his theory went. So from birth to about age of 1 year old, right? The psychosocial thing that has to be worked out is trust versus mistrust. So is the world safe? Will my needs be met? So as you know, babies communicate by crying. So when they cry, they're actually asking for something. They don't have words. They can't say I'm hungry. They can't say my diaper needs changed, right? They can't say I'm tired. If something is wrong, they react by crying. That's how they let their parents know. And if the parents are responding to the cries of the child, then the child will develop a sense of trust. If the child isn't responded to, then they will develop a sense of mistrust. Now realize they don't have the words for it, right? They're just experiencing basic emotions at this point. They're either trusting or they're not trusting. They're either afraid or they're not, right? Whatever the case may be. Then next, from ages 1 to 3, is the task is autonomy versus shame and doubt. right? And so this is where they begin to develop a sense of independence in many tasks. That's why anybody that has kids or anybody that's ever watched kids, if they're doing something and then you go to try to help them and they're like, no, you know, I want to do it, right? Or they react in some way, they're actually trying to develop some autonomy. They're trying to develop some independence. And if they're not able to do that, right, if they don't master this, or then they develop what's known as shame and doubt, right? Which can affect their self-esteem, right? Going on later. Then the next stage is initiative versus guilt. And this occurs between ages of 3 and 6. Oh, and by the way, these are approximations, right? It's not like you turn 1 year old and then all of a sudden you're in autonomy versus shame and guilt, right? These are approximate. So, you know, it kind of flows into from age 1 to age, you know, through 3, and then 3 through 6. Does that make sense? So during this time, they may take initiative on some activities. They may develop some guilt if they've been unsuccessful, or if they have overstepped boundaries, and they might get called on that in some way. So they might develop some guilt around that. And then between the ages of 7 and 11, this is where they're developing or trying to resolve the task of either industry or inferiority. And this is when they begin to develop their sense of like self-confidence in abilities. If they're competent at what they're doing, or a sense of inferiority if they can't do something. So this is about that time period. Then we enter adolescence, right? So stage 5, identity versus confusion. Sometimes you'll see it as identity versus role confusion, but identity versus confusion. And this is where they experiment with and try to develop their own identity and their own roles in their social life. And you know, I mean, a teenager's job is basically to go out and explore. And I know for some parents, that is not always fun for them. And this might be when maybe the kids don't talk to them as much anymore. They're developing their own sense of friends. They're keeping more to themselves, maybe. But all of that is part of them trying to work out their identity. And if they're not able to work out their identity, then they may emerge from that with a sense of confusion, right? Or their uncertainty. And then after adolescence, late adolescence, and you're moving into early adulthood, this is where you begin to establish intimacy and relationships with others. Now, one may argue that some of that does happen, you know, in late adolescence. Agreed. Remember, I kind of said some of these kind of, it's not like a distinct delineated cutoff. Okay, you're 18, now you're doing this. We kind of progress through that. And then in middle adulthood, right, ages 30 to 64, this is where they're working out the generativity versus stagnation, right? So how are they contributing to society? How are they contributing to their family, right? So they may either feel like, yes, I feel good about what I'm doing, I have purpose, or they may feel, you know, stagnant, or I'm not contributing, etc. And then finally, the last stage, which is stage 8, is integrity versus despair. And this begins at approximately age 65 through the rest of a person's life. And this is where they're looking back, right? Because now, you know, you're in your 60s and you've got your whole life behind you. And you're assessing the meaning of your contributions. You're assessing the meaning of how you've done throughout your life. And people that are here, they assess it well, that then they're in their integrity, right? They're like, I feel good about what I've accomplished and I can still be doing more, right? Or they sink the other way and they go into despair. Like I didn't do more, I should have done more, you know, whatever it is, the self-talk that they're giving themselves. All right, so I know that I have just thrown a whole bunch of information at you guys. So we've talked about Freud, and we've talked about Erickson. We are going to see 2 videos after the break. But are there any questions as of this point? And you can just type that in the chat, or you can just shout it out. All right, not hearing or seeing anything. Okay, so this we are not going to do, but if we were live right now, this is what we would be doing. But we're not going to do that, and plus you didn't see the videos yet, so it wouldn't be fair. Actually, I'm going to come back to that. We'll do that after the videos. Okay, but it won't be a quiz, so don't worry. But we are going to have a discussion. All right, so let's talk about Jean Piaget's theory of cognitive development. So with Erickson, he talked about psychosocial development, and Piaget talks about cognitive development. And so he focused on children's cognitive growth and theorized that a child's cognitive abilities also develop through specific stages. He also developed, he proposed the idea that children develop schemata. And we talked about that also in the learning chapter, if you'll recall, when we talked about schemas and concepts, right? And so that's what he said. He said they develop schemas in order to categorize and interpret information as they receive it. And you'll recall, I always said in the learning chapter, kids are like little sponges, right? They're taking in information all the time, and they're trying to make sense of it, learn from it. And when they do this, when they learn new information, they adjust their schemata or their schemas through process of either assimilation or accommodation. And again, just another warning for the exam, assimilation and accommodation can get easily confused. So just make sure you understand those 2 terms. So when you see them, you can recognize which is which. So assimilation is incorporating the information that they receive into their current schemata, right? This is usually easy when it's similar type of information. They're like, I'm familiar with this. Okay, I know where it goes. And accommodation occurs when they get new information, but it's slightly different and it's really, really new. And they either change their schema or they might even develop a new one, right? So that's accommodation. Let's see. Oops. Okay. Okay, so these were his stages of cognitive development. And the first one was between ages from birth to age 2 is sensory motor. And so what that basically means is that the child is experiencing the world through senses and actions, right? So what do babies do? They touch things, and then a lot of times it goes right into their mouth. This would be an example of sensory motor stage, right? The other developmental issues that come up are things like object permanence. And object permanence is, you know why it's so fun to play peekaboo with a kid, with a little kid that doesn't have object permanence yet? Because every time they see their face, it's brand new to them. Or if you hide a toy from them and it's out of sight, out of mind, literally, it's out of sight, out of mind. It's gone to them. They don't have the understanding that just because you can't see anything anymore doesn't mean it still doesn't exist, right? And when they gain object permanence, this is part of that development that happens. And there's also stranger anxiety, which we are going to talk about as well. Let's see here. Then the next stage is known as pre-operational. So it's between ages 2 and 6. And in this stage, they are using words and images to represent things. Like they know words, they can label things, but they don't really have logical reasoning. At this point, they are engaging in pretend play. Kids are very egocentric at this stage. So in other words, they cannot put themselves in other people's shoes. And then also during this stage is when their language is really developing well at this point. And then between ages 7 to 11 is the concrete operational stage. And this is where a child will understand concrete events and analogies in a logical way. They can perform arithmetic. They can engage in more meaningful conversations and experience mathematical transformations, right? They're able to do those kinds of tasks is the word I was looking for. And then age 12 and up is known as the formal operational stage. And what's key here is kids at this stage, children at this stage begin to really use abstract reasoning, right? And abstract logic, and then also moral reasoning. They're less egocentric, or at least they can experience empathy, they can put themselves in another person's shoes, and they're just more able to engage in a more abstract way, right? They can see things differently. All right, let me see something here. All right, I'm going to pause for a moment. I'm going to pause the recording. And all right, so what we're going to do is we're going to watch those 2 videos that I discussed. The first one is going to be on Sigmund Freud. And so we will watch that. What I want you guys to kind of do is just to, even though I said we're not going to have that pop quiz, I do kind of want to have I do want to kind of have a discussion on the similarities and the differences between Freud and Erickson. So we're going to do a little comparing and contrasting. So just kind of pay attention. I've already highlighted some of those, but the videos will also highlight. So here we go with the first video.
Welcome back to another Shorts in Psychology. Today we are going to continue looking at Freud's psychodynamic conception of personality, specifically how he believed personality develops during childhood. He called these the psychosexual stages of development. Freud believed that personality developed through a series of childhood stages and was mostly established by the age of 5. During each of these stages, the pleasure-seeking energies of the id become focused on certain erogenous areas. Freud believed this psychosexual energy or libido was the driving force behind behaviour. Each psychosexual stage is associated with a particular conflict that must be resolved before the individual can successfully advance to the next stage. The resolution of each of these conflicts requires the expenditure of sexual energy, and the more energy that is expended at a particular stage, the more the important characteristics of that stage remain with the individual as he or she matures psychologically. Let's look at each of these psychosexual stages in detail. In the first stage of personality development, the oral stage, the libido is centered in a baby's mouth. It gets much satisfaction from putting all sorts of things into its mouth to satisfy the libido, and thus its id demands. The mouth is vital for eating, and the infant derives pleasure from oral stimulation through gratifying activities such as tasting and sucking. Because the infant is entirely dependent upon caretakers who are responsible for feeding them, they also develop a sense of trust and comfort through this oral stimulation. The primary conflict at this stage is the weaning process. The child must become less dependent on its caregivers. Once the infant is successfully weaned, it will proceed to the second stage of development, the anal stage. During the anal stage, the primary focus of the libido is on controlling bladder and bowel movements. The child is now fully aware that they are a person in their own right and that their wishes can bring them into conflict with the demands of the outside world, i.e., their ego has developed. The major conflict is toilet training, and how parents approach this determines success at this stage. As parents are imposing restrictions on when and where the child can defecate, the nature of this first conflict with authority can determine the child's future relationship with all forms of authority. Parents who utilize praise and rewards for using the toilet at the appropriate time encourage positive outcomes and help children feel capable and productive. Freud believed that positive experiences during this stage served as the basis for people to become competent, productive, and creative adults. Sensitivity now becomes concentrated in the genitals, and masturbation becomes a new source of pleasure. Children also begin to discover the differences between males and females. This sets in motion the conflict between erotic attraction, resentment, rivalry, jealousy, and fear, which Freud called the Oedipus complex in boys and the Electra complex in girls. This is one of Freud's most controversial ideas, and one that many people reject outright. Because both of these conflicts are resolved through the process of identification, which involves the child adopting the characteristics of the same-sex parent. For boys, this includes copying and joining in masculine dad-type behaviours. For girls, this includes copying and joining in feminine and mother-type behaviours, such as playing with dolls. Let's now look at each of these complexes in a little more detail. The name of the Oedipus complex derives from the Greek myth where Oedipus, a young man, kills his father and marries his mother. Upon discovering this, he pokes his eyes out and becomes blind. Freud said that the Oedipus complex arises because the young boy develops sexual desires for his mother. He wants to possess his mother exclusively and get rid of his father to enable him to do so. However, the child also fears that he will be punished by the father for these feelings by losing what he loves most, his penis. Hence, the boy develops what Freud called castration anxiety. For girls, the Electra complex is less than satisfactory. Briefly, the girl desires the father, but realizes that she does not have a penis. This leads to the development of penis envy and the wish to be a boy. The girl resolves this by repressing her desire for her father and substituting the wish for a penis with the wish for a baby. The girl blames her mother for her castrated state, and this creates great tension. The girl then represses her feelings to remove the tension and identifies with the mother to take on the female gender role. However, Freud believed that penis envy is never fully resolved and that all women remain somewhat fixated on this stage. The word latent means hidden, and no further psychosexual development takes place during this stage. During this stage, the libido is dormant. Freud thought that most sexual impulses are repressed during the latent stage, and sexual energy can be sublimated towards other areas such as schoolwork, hobbies, and friendships. Much of the child's energy is channeled into developing new skills and acquiring new knowledge, and this stage is important in the development of social and communication skills and self-confidence. In this stage, play also becomes largely confined to other children of the same gender. The genital stage is the last stage of Freud's psychosexual theory of personality development and begins in puberty as its onset causes the libido to become active again. This stage lasts throughout the rest of a person's life. It is a time of adolescent sexual experimentation, the successful resolution of which is settling down in a loving one-to-one relationship. In this stage, sexual instinct is directed to heterosexual pleasure rather than self-pleasure like during the phallic stage. Where in earlier stages the focus was solely on individual needs, interest in the welfare of others grows during this stage. If the other stages have been completed successfully, the individual should now be well balanced, warm and caring. The goal of this stage is to establish a balance between the various life areas. You can remember the order of these stages by using the mnemonic old age pensioners love grapes. Some people do not seem to be able to leave one stage and proceed on to the next. One reason for this may be that the needs of the developing individual at any particular stage may not have been adequately met, in which case there is frustration. Or possibly the person's needs may have been so well satisfied that they are reluctant to leave the psychological benefits of a particular stage, in which there is overindulgence. Both frustration and overindulgence, or any combination of the two, may lead to fixation at a particular stage. A fixation is a persistent focus on an earlier psychosexual stage. Until this conflict is resolved, the individual will remain stuck in this stage. Let's examine how fixation at each stage of development can influence an adult's personality. Fixation can occur at the oral stage if the infant was fed forcefully, underfed, overfed, or weaned too early. As mentioned earlier, the infant develops a sense of trust and comfort through oral stimulation. Therefore, Freud believed that individuals fixated at this stage had issues with dependency or aggression. An infant that was deprived and perhaps not fed often enough, for example through an enforced feeding schedule of only feeding every 4 hours despite the infant's cries and hunger, could lead to that individual being orally passive. This means they may display personality traits such as being overly trusting and dependent. An infant that was overfed could lead to that individual becoming orally aggressive, which means they display personality characteristics such as being aggressive, dominating, and sarcastic. Oral fixation can also result in the individual seeking oral stimulation through smoking, drinking, eating, or nail biting. Not all parents provide the support and encouragement that children need during toilet training in the anal stage. Some parents instead punish, ridicule, or shame a child for accidents. According to Freud, inappropriate parental responses can result in negative outcomes. If parents take an approach that is too lenient, Freud suggested that an anal expulsive personality could develop, in which the individual has a messy, wasteful, or destructive personality. If parents are too strict or begin toilet training too early, Freud believed that an anal retentive personality develops, in which the individual hates mess, is obsessively tidy, punctual, rigid, and obsessive. They can be stubborn and tight-fisted with their cash and possessions. This is all related to pleasure got from holding on to their feces when toddlers, and their mums then insisting that they get rid of it by placing them on the potty until they perform. The anal expulsive, on the other hand, underwent a liberal toilet training regime during the anal stage. In adulthood, the anal expulsive is the person who wants to share things with you. They like giving things away. In essence, they are sharing their shit. An anal expulsive personality is also messy, disorganized, and rebellious. An individual can become fixated in the phallic stage as a result of abnormal family arrangements that lead to an unusual relationship with the mother or father. Phallic fixation leads to the development of a personality in which an individual may be vain, self-obsessed, envious, or experience feelings of inadequacy, inferiority, or sexual anxiety. As the libido is dormant in the latent stage, an individual cannot become fixated at this stage. However, unresolved conflict in this stage can still influence personality. For example, an individual may be immature or have an inability to form fulfilling relationships as an adult. As the genital stage lasts until death, all individuals that have successfully completed the previous 4 stages will be fixated at this stage. Freud believed that these individuals displayed what he called a healthy personality that is warm, caring, well-adjusted, mature, and able to be loved and love. However, fixation and conflict from other stages can result in the development of sexual perversions in this stage. For example, fixation at the oral stage may result in a person gaining sexual pleasure primarily from kissing and oral sex, rather than sexual intercourse, which is what Freud believed was the proper outlet of sexual instinct. Let's conclude by looking at the same 3 past exam questions as we did in the Structure of Personality video, but this time in the context of the psychosexual stages of development. Pause the video while you answer this question using the content from this video. Welcome back.
All right, and we're actually not going to do that part. So the next one we're going to watch is, it's a shorter video on Erickson. And remember, we're doing a little comparing and contrasting, and then we're going to review. So like I said, don't worry, no pop quiz. And we've already reviewed all of these. And so here is the video.
Erickson's theory of psychosocial development identifies 8 stages which a healthy individual should pass through from birth to death. At each stage, we encounter different needs, ask new questions, and meet people who influence our behavior and learning. Stage 1. Basic trust versus mistrust. As infants, we ask ourselves if we can trust the world, and we wonder if it's safe. We learn that if we can trust someone now, we can also trust others in the future. If we experience fear, we develop doubt and mistrust. The key to our development is our mother. Stage 2. Autonomy versus shame and doubt. In our early childhood, we experience ourselves and discover our body. We ask, is it okay to be me? If we are allowed to discover ourselves, then we develop self-confidence. If we are not, we can develop shame and self-doubt. Both parents now play a major role. Stage 3. Initiative versus guilt. In preschool, we take initiative, try out new things, and learn basic principles like how round things roll. We ask, is it okay for me to do what I do? If we are encouraged, we can follow our interests. If we are held back or told that what we do is silly, we can develop guilt. We are now learning from the entire family. Stage 4. Industry versus inferiority. Now we discover our own interests and realize that we are different from others. We want to show that we can do things right. We ask if we can make it in this world. If we receive recognition from our teachers or peers, we become industrious, which is another word for hard-working. If we get too much negative feedback, we start to feel inferior and lose motivation. Our neighbors and schools now influence us the most. Stage 5. Identity versus role confusion. During adolescence, we learn that we have different social roles. We are friends, students, children, and citizens. Many experience an identity crisis. If our parents now allow us to go out and explore, we can find identity. If they push us to conform to their views, we can face role confusion and feel lost. Key to our learning are our peers and role models. Stage 6. Intimacy versus isolation. As young adults, we slowly understand who we are, and we start to let go of the relationships we had built earlier in order to fit in. We ask ourselves if we can love. If we can make a long-term commitment, we are confident and happy. If we cannot form intimate relationships, we might end up feeling isolated and lonely. Our friends and partners are now central to our development. Stage 7. Generativity versus stagnation. When we reach our 40s, we become comfortable, use our leisure time creatively, and maybe begin contributing to society. Our concern is generativity. If we think that we are able to lead the next generation into this world, we are happy. If we did not resolve some conflicts earlier, we can become pessimistic and experience stagnation. People at home and at work are now who influences them most. Stage 8. Ego integrity versus despair. As we grow older, we tend to slow down and begin to look back over our lives. We ask, "How have I done?" If we think we did well, we develop feelings of contentment and integrity. If not, we can experience despair and become grumpy and bitter. Time to compare us with mankind. Erickson was a German-American psychologist who, together with his wife Joan, became known for his work on psychosocial development. He was influenced by Sigmund and Anna Freud and became famous for coining the phrase identity crisis. Although Erickson lacked even a bachelor's degree, he served as a professor at Harvard and Yale. This Erickson.
All right. So here's that scary slide again. Don't worry, it's not a real quiz. You can use the chat, or you can kind of shout out, what are some of the similarities between Freud and Erickson? Like, what are some things that you noticed that are similar between the two?
They break up everything in a stage for the development?
Yeah,
Or
so
from
both of them,
childhood to adulthood?
well, both of them believed in stages, right? And they also believed that they were in discontinuous stages. And yes, Freud, you could say that the genital stage lasts all the way through late adulthood, yes. What else? What else did you guys see? Or maybe some differences. Actually, we kind of sort of mentioned one difference.
Freud didn't have the stages in the adult life, just early infant or childhood.
Yeah, he really kind of ended with the genital stage, latent stage, and basically just said, well, the rest of it goes on through. Let's see here. Both Freud and Erickson incorporate the concept of egos in their theories. Yeah, and let's see, Liza points out that they were both discontinuous. Yes, that is true. Remember, discontinuous means there are discrete stages, discrete time periods and ages. That is correct. Let's see. And Erickson, a difference, right? Erickson did not base his stages on sexual stimulation. Yes, he did not. He also didn't really talk about penis envy and some of those other complexes, which really are not favored, right? Anything else? Good job. You guys are doing good. Let's see. So let's see, both separate development into stages. Yep, that's similarities. They use age categories for development. Yes, they do. Importance of social experiences. To some extent, yes. But if you'll recall, Freud really had it out for the mothers. Mothers were the blame of everything. Let's see, Kimberly says Erickson's theory is based more on social and Freud's is more on some basic needs. And let's see, what else do we have here? All right, any other thoughts? Pull up the other slide. Let's just see, oh, what? Yeah, and then one of your fellow students says, yeah, he romantically fell in love with his mom, right? You know, Freud, if you look at his theories, one does suspect that he probably had some sexual issues of his own. Here's one thing I will say about Freud. When he was working, you know, this was like the late Victorian era, and there was a lot of sexual repression too. So I really do believe that a lot of his ideas was kind of as the result of that era that he lived in. So that's just my own observation. I don't know I've ever seen that written anywhere, but it is interesting, the era that he was, you know, grew up in. So here we go. So let's talk about this. So some similarities. Both believed in discontinuous development with distinct stages. A couple of you pointed that out. Both emphasized the importance of the mother's influence in early infancy. Even Erickson did, right? He even said, you know, during the trust versus mistrust stage, you know, most of the focus was on the mother. Although one today could argue that, you know, stay-at-home dads and things like that. Let's see. Both believed in that there is a task and conflict to be resolved. That is a similarity, right? So Freud believed that, and so did Erickson, right? And both believe that failure to resolve that task or conflict leads to negative outcomes and behaviors and psychological well-being in later in life. So both of them had those similarities. Some differences, I mean, I think the most obvious, Freud had 5 stages, Erickson only had 8 stages total. And Freud was generally more focused on the mother's influence, whereas Erickson did focus more equally on both parents after early infancy. So once the child was past the trust versus mistrust, the father's involvement became more equal to the mother's. Freud described issues such as penis envy, which, by the way, he believed that women never resolved, that all women have penis envy for their entire life. And then, of course, castration anxiety for males, right? Fear of losing their stuff. The Oedipus and the Electra complex. And Erickson had no such theories like that. The theories themselves, right? Psychosocial versus psychosexual. Freud believed the libido and pleasure-seeking urges were more of the focus, right? While Erickson believed in the social nature of human development. And then finally, the last difference that I kind of want to point out is that Freud believed that personality is formed and shaped only in our childhood, whereas Erickson believed that personality development occurs throughout the lifespan. Right? So, all right. Good on that. And we did talk about this already. So let's just review this real quick, because I want to show this video, which kind of demonstrates some of these items that we talked about in Piaget's stages of cognitive development, right? The sensory motor stage, the pre-operational stage, the concrete operational stage, and then the formal operational stage, which we've already talked about. I kind of went through them, but this is a good video that kind of displays that.
New babies aren't quite sure what happens to objects when they leave their sight. Sky's mom keeps disappearing and reappearing. No wonder peekaboo is so much fun. During their first year, however, infants will learn an important concept: object permanence. Everything has a life of its own, even if it is out of sight.
At Maya's age, babies know to look for the object, but they might not have everything else straight. 10-month-old Simon is about to make a classic mistake. Although he watched us place the toy plane under the white cloth, he'll look for it where he last found it, not where he watched us hide it.
Can you look at these two glasses? Do you think that they have the same amount of juice? You think they have the same? Okay. Now we're going to pour this juice into this glass. Now, do you think that this glass has more juice, this glass has more juice, or do you think that they have the same amount?
That one has more.
This one has more, and why do you think that this one has more?
Because it's taller.
Okay, you ready? Yeah. Okay. Does this row have more quarters? Does this row have more quarters, or do they have the same?
1, 2, 3. Wait. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. They're both the same.
They're the same?
5, 5.
Okay. Okay. Does this row have more quarters? Does this row have more, or do they have the same?
This one has more.
That one has more quarters?
Yeah.
Why does this row have more quarters?
Because it's more far away.
It's more far away?
Yeah, it's more far away than that. Looks like bigger.
All right, we're going to play a game with the graham crackers, and we're going to share them between me and you, okay? Okay. Do you think that we shared those fairly?
No.
No, why not?
You have those and I have this one.
Well, what if we try this? Okay, can I put this down right there?
Okay.
Now is it fair?
Yeah.
Yeah, why is it fair now?
Because we both have two.
Can you tell me what you see when you look at that from where you're sitting? What are some of the things that you see?
And a cat.
A cat.
And a tree and a bone.
Okay, now we're going to do the same thing. Can you tell me what you see when you look at it from that stool?
An owl.
An owl?
And him.
What is that?
A goat.
A goat?
Yeah.
Okay, is there anything else you see?
Yeah, right there.
Right there, what is that?
A tree.
A tree.
And that's another little tree.
Another little tree?
Yeah, right.
Okay. And can you tell me what I see when I look at this from where I'm sitting right here?
An owl.
Okay.
And a goat.
Mm-hmm.
And a little tree. And that. And that.
So first we're going to look at these two cups right here. Do you think there's the same amount of juice in this glass as there is in that glass?
They're even.
They're even? Okay. So we're going to take the juice from this glass and pour it into this one right here.
Okay.
Okay, so now we're going to look at this glass and that one. So do you think that there's more juice in this glass, more juice in this glass, or do you think that they have the same amount?
Same amount.
Okay, why do you think that they have the same amount?
Just because this is skinny doesn't mean it's not the same amount. It has the same amount of juice in it, but this one is just wider and this one's skinnier, but they have the same amount of juice.
It says, if you hit a glass with a hammer, the glass will break.
I knew that.
And then this one says, Dawn hit a glass with a hammer.
I knew that too.
So what happened to the glass?
It broke.
It broke. Why did it break?
Because the hammer's hard.
If you hit a glass with a feather, the glass will break.
No, it won't.
And this is the second rule. Dawn hit a glass with a feather. What happened to the glass?
Nothing.
Nothing happened. Why didn't anything happen?
Because the feather was soft.
If you hit a glass with a feather, the glass will break.
Okay.
And the second one, Dawn hit a glass with a feather. What happened to the glass?
It broke.
And why did it break?
Because the rule says if you hit a glass with a feather, it'll break. So if you hit a glass with a feather, it broke.
Yay. Yay, abstract thinking. Woohoo! All right. So let's see here. Let's back up to this. So there was some really good examples there, right? Of you know, the end, abstract thinking, being able to understand that rule that was provided, and then being able to see what happened with the glass. And then there, I mean, yeah, with breaking the glass. And then there was the juice, right? The juice thing in the pre-operational stage, right? Even though you're looking at the two glasses of juice, the child was looking at both glasses of juice, same amount, watched the researcher pour it into the taller glass, and did not realize at that point it's still the same amount of juice. And then, of course, during the concrete operational stage, that little girl was able to explain very well what had happened and how it was that it was the same amount of juice, and that it didn't matter that it had been poured into a different container. The size of the container affected the appearance of the juice. And so this is a really good video to show these different stages of cognitive development. So, does anybody have any questions on Piaget, or even going back to Freud or Erickson, if anything's come up? Because we're about to do a little exercise here in the next little section, but I want to wrap up and make sure I've covered everything. All right, not hearing any. Something comes up, of course, we will address it. So here's what we're going to do. Kind of want everybody to, let's just kind of read this. Do I have a volunteer that would read this slide for me? Giving people a chance to unmute.
I'll volunteer.
Oh, sweet. Thank you.
All right. And it reads, in Europe, a woman was near death from a special kind of cancer. There was one drug that the doctors thought might save her. It was a form of radium that a druggist in the same town had recently discovered. The drug was expensive to make, but the druggist was charging 10 times what the drug cost him to make. He paid $200 for the radium and charged $2,000 for a small dose of the drug. The sick woman's husband, Heinz, went to everyone he knew to borrow the money, but he could only get together about $1,000, which is half of what it cost. He told the druggist that his wife was dying and asked him to sell it cheaper or let him pay later. But the druggist said, no, I discovered the drug and I'm going to make money from it. So Heinz got desperate and broke into the man's store to steal the drug for his wife. Should the husband have done that?
All right, very good. So what we're going to do is we're going to break up into groups, and what I'd like you guys to do is to talk about this dilemma. what should the husband have done, right? And if everything works out the way I'm going to try to plan it to work out, we'll break out into groups, and then I will be able to share this on the screen for you all to read as well while you're in your groups, so that you can have the discussion. And what I would like is a volunteer kind of scribe and spokesperson for each group to kind of share when we come back together, okay? So what I'm gonna do is I'm gonna pause the recording for right now, and then set up the breakout rooms, and then we'll get started. Okay, so we're back from our breakout room discussions, and with the Heinz dilemma, which was one of Kohlberg's inventions here. And so what I'd like to do now is just kind of like see where everybody in the different rooms came up with. So for breakout room number 1, spokesperson, the floor is yours. What did you guys come up with?
Hi, Professor. Well, it was pretty cut and dry. I mean, the sad thing about it is this article right here pretty much kind of like describes of a lot of what's going on in today's world, and what's been going on. Pharmaceutical companies, charging up, an arm and a leg.
Yeah, big pharma.
I mean, it's really, it's unfortunate, it's sad. And with that being said, it was a pretty easy determination. What we came to the conclusion is, yeah, we would have no problem of doing whatever we had to do for the sake of our loved ones. I mean, it's a really cut and dry, simple, right to the point. And I think that most people, I can speak for a lot of us, I could be wrong, I'm going on a limb, but I think a majority of us would do the same thing. And especially I don't know, even outside of a loved one, no, I don't think, who wants to see anyone suffer, especially if there's something that could be that could, be beneficial or help.
Yeah.
Why does money always have to be, I mean, it's, that's it.
So
That's just a,
oh, sorry, didn't mean to cut you off. So just to kind of to kind of recap what I heard, right? And this is very interesting. So it sounds like when you guys were having your discussion, right, the idea of big pharma comes in, right? Greed comes in. And so when we're thinking about these dilemmas, it seems as though you guys were kind of filtering it through your own belief systems and your experiences. Sounds like modern news events, right? Since big pharma came up, and it's interesting, and that's one of the reasons why this is such a cool discussion to have as we move into Kohlberg's stages of moral development, because that's what we're talking about here. So very good, group 1. Group 2, spokesperson, you now have the floor. What did you guys come up with?
Okay, so considering how the druggist might have been being a little bit greedy, he could have had the person pay in installments. There's so many ways that he could have gone about it, but he just said, like, oh, I need to make money from this. Like, I'm the one who came up with it, and if you don't have the money now, like, that's too bad. So I feel like the action of going in, getting the drug in a life or death situation was justified.
Okay, all right. So kind of similar to group 1. Excellent.
And no regrets.
and no regrets. There you go. No regrets. All right, very good. How about group number 3, spokesperson?
Yeah, we kind of came to the same conclusion as groups 1 and 2. We think that the husband did what he had to do, that he had done like a risk assessment of like, if he lost his freedom, it would still be worth it to save his wife. And then the discussion about the druggist basically just being greedy for a small amount of a drug. Basically the same conclusion as the other two.
And I like how actually in group 2, you guys had proposed an alternate solution, right? You could have paid in installments. I kind of like that. And then group 3, you guys, with the risk assessment, if I do this, I might go to jail, but you know what? My wife will be alive and it'll be worth it to me. Nicely done. Nicely done. All right, group number 4, spokesperson, you now have the floor.
I think that was us, right? So we were 50-50. Well, most of us said no. But it's a kind of a struggle there, but
so I'm sorry, can I ask, when you say most of us said no, what were you actually saying no to? I want to make sure I understand.
he shouldn't have done that.
Okay, so no, he should not have done that.
He should
Okay.
not have done that. Yeah.
Okay.
Basically, well, what we kind of came to the conclusion of, he could have negotiated, could have negotiated. Yeah, he could have negotiated. He could have spoke to the pharmacist, try to talk him down a bit, get on a payment plan maybe. But I think at the end of the day, he did what he did. He felt like he needed to do that, so he did what he did. But I wouldn't have done it. I would say no.
Okay. All right.
Try to. But if it came down to because if it comes down to that might save her. There's no clear cut answer that she can be saved or she will be saved. It might save her. He could be doing time for stealing the thing, and she could die while he's locked up. So.
Right. Okay.
Yeah.
All right. Good. It's interesting. I like the 50-50. So even though there was a spokesperson that kind of came up and said there was 50-50, is there one person in the group that wouldn't mind having their voice recorded that went the other way?
Right here. Yeah, I initially I argued against doing it initially, but that's the brain working that I know is illegal. You can go to jail, blah blah blah. But then I put it in the concept of a loved one. This is somebody that my grandchild or something. I'm going to do that. This is going to happen. And I use the analogy of what we have today. We have a lot of homeless people who are hungry who go into these places and they steal food and they get arrested. They're taking that chance. They know they can possibly get arrested and go to jail, but because they're hungry, they desire to eat overweighs their freedom. Yeah. And it's the same thing here. My desire to see my loved one survive outweighs my freedom. So when he said 50-50, it was pretty much 2 to 3. We had 3 yeses and 2 nos.
Gotcha. Okay.
I argued. I argued initially no, but then looking at it from that perspective, looking at the loved one, I changed over to yes. I would have done it.
All right. Nice job. You got group 4. You guys did a great job. I like the 50-50 response. I like the ones that said no, he shouldn't have done it. It's illegal, right? And then I also like hearing the other side of the argument in group 4 with you do what you got to do. I'm kind of like paraphrasing, right? So very good. Awesome. All right, group number 5, spokesperson, you now have the floor.
Yes. So my group, we were pretty much on the same page. I think at first, we were just like, you know what, we kind of get why he did what he did. He was just underneath a lot of pressure and stress, but he was just very impulsive and desperate. And I don't think he was thinking about his decision making skills at the time.
Yeah.
So we were trying to come up with different sources. So we said, he could have got a loan or something, or tried to use that $1,000 that he did raise, flip it and, get a profit off of it. Or he could have did, different financing options, or we didn't know if he was like with the church or anything. So see if like his church could kind of help him out with like fundraising or nonprofit groups, outreach programs. Yeah, but that's pretty much it. Like, I mean, and I get what other people are saying, like, oh, well, you know, if he was going to go to jail, at least like his wife would have had the drug, but we don't really know that. Like, we don't know if he would have got arrested and he didn't, you know, exit with the drug, or, you know, so it's just very risky. But I think that's what we pretty much agreed on. So there's different options, but it might not have been when he wanted it to be, but I don't know, morally, it's just like you can't really take from other people. You can't do that because there's going to be consequences for your actions. And he could have avoided that.
Yeah. All right. Very good. What's really cool about this discussion is each of you that has had a chance to speak has demonstrated one of the stages of moral development, according to Kohlberg, which is why I like to do this exercise. I hope you guys had fun with it. It seems like you did. So that's really, really good. So let's talk about this a little bit more. And let's look at Lawrence Kohlberg and his stages of moral development. And there are 3 stages, right? There's level 1. I'm sorry, there's there's level 1, there's 3, this is a misprint, it's 3 levels. And then you'll see there are 6 stages within those 3 levels. I can see I have a typo on here. So level 1 is pre-conventional morality, right? And in level 1, there are 2 stages, stages 1 and stages 2. In stage 1, it's obedience and punishment that determines a behavior. And the idea here is that in stage 1, a person doesn't do something because they're trying to avoid punishment, right? And then in stage 2, their behavior is driven by self-interest and totally by rewards, right? So level 1, pre-conventional morality, that's the first level. Stages 1 and 2. Level 2 is conventional morality. And under conventional morality, level 2, comes stages 3 and 4. And in stage 3, this is an interpersonal stage, right? So the behavior is then driven by social approval. So in other words, I'm not going to do something to someone else because all these people are watching, right? And I don't want to be disapproved of. So we behave in ways in which we get approval socially. And then in stage 4, this is the authority stage. And this is when behavior is driven by obeying authority, by conforming to the social order, right? And that's what dictates a person's behavior. And then finally, in level 3, has 2 stages, right? Stages 5 and 6. And excuse me. And in post-conventional morality, which is level 3, there's the social contract. And in the social contract, this is where a person's behavior is driven by the balance of social order versus individual rights. So this might be the idea behind well, what's coming to my mind is like we all drive on the right side of the road, right? It's safe to do that. There's certain order to do it, you know. But one could argue, well, I have a right to drive any way I want, right? But we behave in that way because it's the best way to do it. It's the safest way to do it, as an example. And then stage 6, universal ethics. This is where behavior is driven by internal moral principles, right? So first, let me ask, are there any questions on this? Because what I'm going to do right now is I'm going to turn back to the groups and let's see if we can't figure out which level and which stage of moral development you guys fell into. Doesn't that sound like fun? All right. So first, are there any questions? All right. So let's, I'm going to circle back around to group number 1. And first, I'm going to give the floor to the spokesperson, but then, you know, I'll invite others from group 1 to participate as well. So spokesman for group 1, based on what your group came up with, which level and which stage of moral development do you identify as falling into?
Looking at this, I would have to say that maybe I could use some help, group.
Oh. Well, let's see if we.
I would say, okay, here we go. I'm thinking of almost level 2 morality.
That's what I was thinking too, Ty.
And I would almost say stage 3, maybe. Well, hold on. I'm reading these other ones. Maybe
it's kind of hard, isn't it?
Yeah, as far as, I mean, the level 2, I would think that as far as the levels go, but as far as the stages, I'm thinking like personally, like, I mean, I'm looking at stage, I mean, they all kind of, there's a conflict of interest with a few of them, but I mean, I'm looking at stage 2 because in it, you know, an individual interest.
All right.
I mean, and
well, so let's talk about stage
5.
Oh, go ahead.
I mean, there's a border. It's you know, it's definitely teetering on a few of them, but stage 2 is looking pretty.
Okay. All right. Anybody else in group 1 wanna?
I was agreeing with Ty because it was self-interest and rewards, but then also when he said stage 6 too, behavior driven by internal moral principles. So I don't know. I was kind of on the same level as him. It was teetering.
Okay. Yeah. So let's just break that down. And this is another reason why I like to have this discussion, right? So stage 2, if we're thinking of stage 2, we're totally thinking self-interest and rewards. If I behave well, I'm going to get a sticker to put on the board, and then later I'm going to get a reward, right? For behaving well, right? So it really is very egocentric at this point. So
that's not right, because it was for his wife then.
Exactly, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
So so stage 2 probably would not be where you guys landed, right? Because what I heard you guys say was, well, I got to do what I got to do to help my wife, right?
Right.
And the right thing to do is get the medicine, right? And big pharma is the bad guy, right? Remember, this is how we had started off that conversation, right? So to me, it feels like level 3, post-conventional morality, stage 6, right? Universal ethics. The behavior is being driven by the internal moral principles. My wife's life, or a human life, is more important than the druggist's. By the way, that's an old term for pharmacist. More important than the pharmacists making money, right? Which could be looked at that as immoral, right? You're being greedy, and greed is immoral, right? So very good, very, very good. All right. Group number 2. the spokesperson has the floor. And you guys talked about paying in installments. And I actually did not write down, I took some notes. I did not write down what you guys ultimately decided, and that's my fault. So what was your ultimate decision, and where do you think it fits in Kohlberg's stages of moral development?
So we ended up deciding that his actions were justified because of the greed of the druggist and the so many other possibilities that he could have gone about it, and the life and death situation, et cetera, et cetera. So
okay, all right, very good. And so then pick a level and a stage.
I would go by probably level 1, stage 2.
Okay. And based on let's see here.
Also stage 1.
What's that?
Also maybe stage 1 too, like going out of his way to steal.
Oh, hold on one second. I'm not sure if that's your microphone or if somebody else is unmuted, but you kind of got blocked out by movement and it rubbing up against
covering
something.
the mic.
Oh, that's what it was. Okay, sorry. So say your last part again. I'm sorry.
So between stage 1 and stage 2, the reward of being healed again and trying to avoid punishment by law enforcement and the druggist going around the cost. So that's
okay.
That's what I think.
Okay. Anyone else from group number 2? And just to correct me if I'm wrong, the group decided that Hines should have stolen it. Is that correct?
Yes.
Okay. All right. So again, here's where I'm thinking, right? So in stage 1, obedience versus punishment, the behavior is driven by avoiding the punishment. So if Hines, or if you guys in Hines's place, did not break into the pharmacy and did not steal the medicine because of you being afraid of being punished some way, I would agree that that is definitely level 1, stage 1. The behavior was dictated by obedience and the fear of punishment. So they're not going to do it because I don't want to go to jail, right? So, but what I heard you guys say was that he was kind of justified, right? I'm also going to rule out stage 2 at this point because, again, self-interest and the rewards really would be for that individual themselves, right? So in stage 1, we're avoiding punishment. In stage 2, we're just looking out for ourselves, right? So I'm either being punished, I'm obedient because I don't want to be punished, or I'm engaging in this behavior because I'm going to get something out of it. And the difference here is Hines wasn't really looking for himself, right? He was looking out for his wife. So I actually
also
go ahead.
The reward of having your wife by your side and not passing away from illness.
Okay, I could see that point.
A different side of that.
Yeah, I could see that point. Any other thoughts from group number 2? All right, let's look at group number 3, who did the risk assessment and determined that it would be worth it, right? As I wrote down those notes.
Yeah, so we determined that he was correct in stealing the medication. I think we'd be under level 3, stage 6, because it would be, we would be using our internal morals to determine that it would be right for him to steal something that's being blocked behind a paywall that's like so like life-saving and critical.
Right. And so did you guys actually talk about your own individual morality around that? I imagine that you would have, because it certainly played a role.
We touched on it a little bit. I actually used to work in pharmacy, so it was kind of a point that I've like worked with personally in my job, working with medications that are like cost prohibitive.
Yeah, right. Yeah, all right, very good. And I agree. Level 3, stage 6. I would agree with that. Let's see. Group number 4. You got a couple of things going on in group number 4. Since there was that 50-50 split or 3-2 split, which is really cool because that gives us an opportunity to delve in this discussion a little bit more. Spokesperson, I think you got, I think you said that initially you thought that no one should do that, right? That there should have been more negotiation or whatever. So having that thought in mind, what level and what stage do you think you were in at that point?
I would say level 3, stage 6, whether it's a yes or a no, because I believe from what I don't know if I'm getting it right or not.
Okay.
I think it all depends on your motive. Like if I were to steal it, tie the guy up and then say, I'm gonna sell his stuff, sell his merchandise, sell his product, then that would be like stage 2, level 1, stage 2, no? Or wait, stage 2, no.
That might be, and
right?
that might be amoral, meaning
right.
lack of morality, amoral behavior, antisocial behavior because of self-interest and that personal reward, right? Like I'm going to do this, right?
Right. But I think it's because of it. It's a loved one. It's the motive. I mean, you could see. You could break. There's so many ways you can approach this situation. You could break in there with your $1,000, get what you need, and leave those $1,000 there, and then there's so many things you could do. You can negotiate with the guy. If he doesn't want to go there, then we're gonna break in. There's just so many ways this can play out, and I think because he's making a profit.
Right.
He's making 10 times more than what he invested in it. So, or I don't know. There's just so many ways.
And some could argue that morally that's his right. He did that, right? Some people could argue that. So let's so based on what you said, so now we have a third scenario. So the scenario you just said definitely is level 1, stage 2, but it's amoral behavior, it's antisocial behavior, right? The no, he shouldn't do it. And I think someone else in your group said it's illegal, you'll go to jail, right?
Probably like stage 4. Level 2, stage 4. That response, that specific response that you just mentioned?
Actually, it's level 1, stage 1.
Okay.
Because if you're not going to do it because you're afraid of being punished at this point, then your behavior is being driven strictly by the desire to avoid punishment. See? So if that's the reasoning, then that's stage 1, obedience and punishment. Stage 4, authority, your behavior is driven by obeying authority and conforming to social order. And one would argue that breaking into the pharmacy is not really conforming to social order, is it? Right? So based on the comments from there, I would lean back toward level 1, stage 1. Yeah. Any other thoughts from?
Yeah, I like the intervene right there. For those who actually went into the guy's store and stole the thing, I'm looking at stage 5, social contract. But I mean, we're right there. We're trying to balance good versus evil. I mean, we know what we're doing is evil, but we want to be good at the same time. So I mean, that one, level 3 in this post is already done. But we're still trying to balance it out in our own brains and our own mind as we walk away with the drugs and take it home to our wives.
Yeah. And I could certainly see an argument for level 3, definitely stage 5 or stage 6, based on what you were saying. Yeah. And then let's see. And group number 5, when I took notes, I wrote down the word consequence, but I forget exactly where you guys came down on. So refresh my memory and tell me where you guys think you are on the stages of moral development.
So I understand that he's human, and like when you're struggling, you're just underneath like a lot of pressure, and you're not really thinking about like all your different options that you can have. But we basically said that he could have had different sources, like getting a loan, financing, doing a GoFundMe or some type of fundraiser, nonprofit groups and outreach programs. So I think we would be in level 1, stage 1, but maybe also level 2, stage 4.
Okay, all right. I could certainly see that, right? Because what I hear you saying, and so correct me if I'm wrong, but what I hear you saying is that you're really falling on the side of, no, he shouldn't do that, conform to the social order, and that there are other options that he could do. Fundraising, GoFundMe, negotiation, try to get a loan, right? So in other words, you're trying to keep it, you're trying to prevent him from doing the ultimate act of breaking in to the into the pharmacy, is what I'm hearing.
Yes.
Yeah. Okay. Any other thoughts from group 4? Anybody else had something? I'm sorry, group 5. Someone have something else different or different thoughts on that? All right. So let's look and see here. I think I have a video that's next that kind of demonstrates the stages of moral development. And so you're going to see this again. This is actually kind of a cool video, and they go through different ages of kids. And by the way, when it comes to like the stages, let me go back to this for a second. I kind of want to talk about these stages first before I move in. Most of this is age dependent. However, for instance, most kids are usually stage 1, stage 2. And as we grow older, we kind of move up through the levels and the stages, right? However, having said that, even though that's kind of based on kids, like I just said, there are adults that are definitely stage 1 and stage 2, level 1 pre-conventional morality. For instance, some of my clients that are in drug court, right? And I'm not saying anything bad about them. It's people are where they are. And one of the things that I'm looking at when I'm working with my clients, and it comes to the stages of moral development, because we actually do some work around trying to develop moral development, trying to develop different ways of looking at the world. So if you start using drugs when you are 12 years old, and you're engaged in criminal activity at an early age, these are individuals that didn't necessarily go through the normal developmental milestones that others have gone through. And so, like, for instance, like I might have a client who is in level 1 pre-conventional morality, stage 1, and he's conforming to everything that we want done in drug court, coming to group, testing, whatever. But the only reason why he's doing it is because he's avoiding a sanction. And a sanction is a court legal term that means some kind of punishment from the court, which could include anything from community service to public works service to incarceration, right? So I might be working with an adult who really his stage of moral development it's level 1, stages 1 and 2. So he's either doing things, or she is doing things to avoid punishment, or their behavior is totally egocentric and totally self-interested, not worried about others around. One of my favorite things that I often hear clients say is that this is a selfish program. Well, I have a whole speech on that. I won't go into it now, but I try to reframe that. It's like, no, this is a responsible program, and that selfishness has not been helping, right? So a person who's in stage 2 might be kind of selfish, egocentric, driven. Stage 1, again, is just avoidance of punishment. So they're only doing things, they're only behaving in ways based on level 1 pre-conventional morality. And we kind of want to like help them move through that. So I hope that makes a little bit of sense. So the reason why I ran off on that little tangent is mainly because of this video that I'm about to show here. And it's going to show different ages kids, and they're being asked the same questions that I just asked you, basically. This is just a shortened version. So here we go.
Do you think this guy should steal the medicine?
No.
You don't think he should steal it? And why don't you think he should steal it?
A police would catch him.
A police would catch him? Should Heinz steal the drug?
Yes.
You think he should? And why do you think he should?
So he can save his wife.
Okay.
And if he can save enough money, he should give the extra $2,000 to the druggist or whatever.
Okay. And in general, should people try to do everything they can to obey the law?
Yes.
You think they should? And why?
Well, sometimes they should.
Okay, so
sometimes they shouldn't.
Okay, so I'll ask you again. So do you think everybody should do everything they can to obey the law?
No way.
No. Okay. And why do you think they shouldn't always do everything they can to obey the law?
Because the law might be corrupt.
Do you think Heinz should steal the drug?
I guess so, yeah.
You think so? And why do you think he should steal the drug?
Well, based upon the fact that it's immoral that the first guy is charging so much. I mean, if there's absolutely no other way around it, I'm sure he could. Well, I guess you said he couldn't think of another way, so yeah, I guess that's the only, that's what I do. It's the only option.
Okay. Because of the guy was immoral in the first place.
Yeah, I guess so.
And do you think it's important for people to do everything they can to save another's life?
I guess so, yeah.
Yeah. And why do you think that?
Because life is valuable, I guess. A lot more important than money. Or, yeah, it's a lot more important than money.
Okay. And in general, should people try to do everything they can to obey the law?
In general, yeah.
So, times when they shouldn't obey the law, like why in general? Why do you think that?
Well, if there's several, if it's a matter of right and wrong, and the law is clearly wrong, or what the guy is doing is clearly wrong, then I guess there's a point where too much is too much.
Okay. What do you mean by too much?
Like, I don't know, like that guy withholding medicine that isn't, if he makes $2,000, that's a lot of money. So, if he's, pushing making $4,000, it's just ridiculous. And I guess, enough is enough in that case.
All right. So let's see here. I'm going to go back one slide. Oh, there we go. So we had a 6-year-old, we had a 9-year-old, and then we had a 16-year-old. Where do you guys think that fell in the levels and the stages. The 6-year-old, where do you guys think? Where do you think he fell?
Level 1, stage 1. The
Yeah,
6-year-old.
Yeah.
He was
Yes.
definitely level 1, stage 1. Absolutely. What about the 9-year-old?
Level 2, stage 3, I think so.
Okay. I could see an argument for stage 3, possibly stage 4. And I agree. He was definitely speaking in ways of like some level 2 stuff.
Yeah, sometimes he say,
Yeah. Yeah. And then what about the 16-year-old?
Level 3, stage 5.
Yeah, definitely level 3. And I heard stage 5. Did someone else say stage 6? I could see an argument for either or. Actually, I could see how he displayed a little bit of both. If you really think about it.
I would say stage 6 because he said human life is valuable.
Yeah. That was definitely the pinnacle of his thought, wasn't it? Yeah. Yeah, excellent. You guys did great. And so I hope you enjoyed this exercise. I hope you learned a lot from it. I will say this, when it comes to, as you can see, just from this this diagram here, it can get kind of complex, right? And you will be tested on some of these. So that's why I kind of went through this exercise, took a little bit of extra time to help gain a little bit of understanding, right? Experience and knowledge through experience, right? So so yeah. Let's see, it is almost 9 o'clock. Let's see where we're going here, because we're about to start into a new section on stages of development. So I think, so chapter 9 is a big chapter, and I still have quite a bit of ways to go through these slides. So obviously we're not finishing everything tonight. We will be moving, I will finish this up on Wednesday, and we will move into chapter 10 on Wednesday. So what I'm trying to decide is, should I break into this now? There's quite a bit here. I want to make sure I don't rush through this. We could talk about some of these. Let's just go ahead and do a couple of these slides. First, we're going to talk about stages of development, and this is like prenatal, infancy through childhood. This is where we're going to go into. And obviously, a lot of this is going to be physiological development, which is another area that we're moving into. So let's go ahead and do this and do a couple of slides, get this in, and then we'll end for the night and pick up on Wednesday. So when it comes to prenatal development, I know you guys have had biology and everybody kind of understands these concepts, but this is an important aspect of this chapter. So for some of you, it might be review. Some things might be new, right? So in prenatal development, hold on, looks like I got a question. No, nobody missed roll call. I've already taken it. So we're good there. If there's any discrepancy, just let me know. But I captured everybody. All right, so back to this. So in the germinal stage, right, which is the first 1 to 2 weeks of after in the very beginning, right? So this is where conception occurs. Everyone knows the sperm fertilizes the eggs. If you remember from your biopsychology section, there's 23 chromosomes per, and those fuse, and that's what begins mitosis, which is cell division, and the zygote is initially it's a 1-cell structure that forms at conception, and then it divides and divides and divides. It becomes more specialized as the child grows and forms organs and specific body parts. The embryonic stage is the zygote at this point has about 150 cells. So it's still quite small. And it travels down the fallopian tubes and actually implants itself in the lining of the uterus. And at this point, the zygote is now an embryo because it is a multicellular organism. And this is when organs begin to function, like the heart begins to beat, things like this. Basic structures begin to develop, such as the chest, the head, the abdomen. And then all of this is contained within the placenta, right? Which is the structure that is connected to the uterus. And that's what provides nourishment and oxygen to the embryo from the mother via the umbilical cord. And I just misspoke. I said it's encapsulated in it. That's not true. That's connected to it by the umbilical cord. And so this is kind of like what it looks like, right? So during the fetal stage, from weeks 9 through week 40, these are the, this is what it looks like, right? So at 9 weeks, let me turn on my laser pointer. So at 9 weeks, this is the fetal stage. This is when it begins. And you can see within 12 weeks, this is where sex organs begin to differentiate, right? So penis or the vagina begin to differentiate. By 16 weeks, this is where fingers and toes begin to develop. At 20 weeks, you can see hearing actually begins. 24 weeks, lungs begin to develop, and you can also see the changes in the baby. 28 weeks, the brain is growing very rapidly. 32 weeks, bones fully develop. Muscles are developing or fully developed by 36 weeks. And at 40 weeks, you have full term development. So that's weeks 9 through 40. So there are things that actually impact prenatal development, right? So there's genetic influences, there's environmental influences that affect development during each of the prenatal stages. And it's important for the mother to receive prenatal care, which is medical care during pregnancy, and to monitor the health of the baby and the fetus and the mother. So let's talk about some environmental agents, right? So a teratogen is any environmental agent, whether it's biological. So in other words, so let's just look at this slowly here. So biological, for instance, some kind of infection could be, that could harm the fetus if it gets there, would be considered teratogenic, right? Chemical, so we're talking like alcohol, drugs, those kinds of things. And any physical things that might be going on genetically or within the mother that could cause problems, right, and damage the fetus. So for teratogens, like for instance, alcohol can cause fetal alcohol syndrome, and you'll see some examples of that in a slide later on. Smoking is a teratogen that can cause premature birth, result in low birth weight, stillbirths, and has been linked with sudden infant death syndrome. So even after the child is born, right, those effects, because we know that SIDS happens, right, early in infancy when it happens. And then drugs such as heroin, which I see is misspelled, I'll have to fix, cocaine, methamphetamine, as well as any prescribed drugs. And then, of course, radiation or viruses such as HIV, herpes, rubella, those kinds of things are all teratogens. So here is fetal alcohol syndrome. And so first of all, whenever you hear the word syndrome, that's usually refers to a collection of symptoms or effects, right? So fetal alcohol syndrome is basically a collection of birth defects that is associated with consumption of alcohol during pregnancy. And so these are some of the findings. So physically, their head size tends to be smaller. There also tends to be some abnormal facial features, right? Small eye openings, low nasal bridge. Let's see, I've got my thing here. The mid face is flattened. The area just below your nose, which most of us have like some indentation, is smooth. It's an undeveloped jaw line. So there are definitely physical manifestations that can be easily identified. And then cognitively, an individual that experiences fetal alcohol syndrome, this is even later in life, tend to have poor impulse control. They exercise poor judgment. There are higher rates of ADHD involved with that. Learning issues occur at this point, and they tend to have lower IQ scores. So with the physical stuff, we could definitely see that right here. Cognitive, that becomes more apparent as the person grows and interacts in their environment, goes to school, things like that. You begin to see those symptoms.
And that's totally true. I used to work with a little young kid with that one as a respite care. All those characteristics that were true, he got the behaviors.
Yeah. It's very, it's highly correlated with that, right? We just see that. All right, so let's see, what time is it? Okay, it's 9:05. Let's see what. Okay, yeah, we could do this. Yeah. So now we're going to talk about like infancy through childhood, and just on a little side note, I love kids. Kids are great. They're so adorable, right? As infants, and even at this stage, right? Happy little thing, celebrating 1 year, developing their personalities. It's awesome. Sorry, I got off on a little tangent.
They are so honest. I love them too.
Yeah, they are. They're very honest, right? Very honest. So let's talk about newborns for a minute. Then, we in the previous chapter, in chapter 6, in the learning chapter, we talked about natural instincts and reflexes, right? And so here we're revisiting it again. There are just some things that newborns do not have to be taught, right? There are natural reflexes that are just inborn, automatic, instinctual responses, right? And so this collectively is known as the newborn responses. So first there's the rooting reflex, and that's where the baby turns its head towards something that touches its cheek. So you can test this out yourself. Go find a newborn, not as strangers. Don't do this without permission. But they naturally will reflex to that, to the touch of the cheek. And then there's the sucking reflex, right? They just automatically do that to anything that you place near the mouth. It's just natural for them to do that. And then, of course, the grasping reflex. You put your little finger there and they grasp your hand. And then the moral reflex, which the baby spreads the arms and pulls them back when they are startled or they feel like they're falling, right? So it's just that natural reflex. So sensory abilities are not all completely fully developed at birth, right? So vision is actually the least developed sense, which is interesting, which is why holding the baby close with mothers, right, for bonding is important, because they really cannot see that far. They prefer human voices, specifically their mother's voice, over a stranger's. And so I'm going to remind you guys of Elizabeth Loftus and her research. Remember the linguistic genius of babies. This was kind of pointed out as well in that video and in her research. And you saw examples of that in that video. And that was from chapter 7. Sorry, chapter 7. And then can distinguish the smell between their mothers and other individuals. So very, very cool there. All right, so here's what I think we're going to do. We're going to end here, and we're going to pick it up with physical development on Wednesday. So this will be the slide that we'll start off with for part 2 of this, of chapter 9. So I'm going to go ahead and stop the recording, and but don't leave just yet. All right. So I'm going to pause recording or stop the recording, and pick this back up on Wednesday.